President Trump reportedly briefed on options for strikes in Iran as the Islamic Republic teeters amid the most intense protests since the 1979 revolution that brought the mullahs to power.
This is something pretty incredible that's happening in Iran. It means hitting them very, very hard where it hurts.
Here at home, very different kinds of protests as outrage over the killing of an anti-ICE activist in Minneapolis spread across the nation as dueling interpretations of a video reveal the depth of the divide among Americans.
It was an act of domestic terrorism.
To ICE, get out of Minneapolis. We do not want you here.
If you protest and express your First Amendment rights, please do so peacefully.
Under pressure at home, it's not just Iran where the president is looking for victories, making his pitch to big oil for big spending in Venezuela, where the U.S.-backed government is struggling.
All of the companies here today are going to be treasured partners in bringing the nation of Venezuela back to life.
If we look at the legal and commercial constructs and frameworks in place today in Venezuela, today it's uninvestable.
Nor is the president backing down on the Don Roe doctrine.
We are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not.
He did discover one check on his power, an increasingly restive and narrow Republican majority in Congress, with nearly 24 Republicans openly defying the president on Obamacare and Venezuela.
On this vote, the yeas are 230, the nays are 196. The bill is passed and without objection.
We are making sure that the speaker and leadership get the message that for many of us, doing nothing here is not an option.
The president rebuking the dissenters and warning them of the potential consequences for him.
You got to win the midterms. They'll find a reason to impeach me. I'll get impeached.
Let's get into all of it. With us today, former UN Ambassador John Bolton, who has spent decades trying to bring down the Iranian regime. Congressman Suhas Subramanyam, Virginia Democrat, on his part of the effort to restrain ICE after the shooting in Minneapolis. And Congressman Rob Bresnahan, Republican of Pennsylvania, one of the leaders of the successful effort to defy the White House on Obamacare. All that and our best in the business panel of journalists, including the great George Will. The Hill Sunday starts now. Hello from Washington and welcome to the Hill Sunday. I'm Chris Stirewalt. Crushing sanctions, gross mismanagement, and 2 years of military and tactical defeats at the hands of Israel and the United States have brought Iran to the brink. Protests that began in late December, sparked by a currency crisis, have intensified this weekend. NewsNation's Hannah Brandt joins us with the latest. Hannah, what do we know at this hour?
Well, Chris, we know President Trump and the White House are really watching the situation in Iran closely and even weighing U.S. involvement. We know President Trump has been briefed in recent days on a range of options for military strikes in Iran. That's according to multiple different reports. And while the president has not reportedly made a decision yet, he is seriously considering ordering a U.S. strike. Now, in a weekend post on Truth Social, the president did write, Iran is looking at freedom, perhaps like never before. The USA stands ready to help. That's a bit vague, right? He didn't detail exactly what he means by help, though on Friday, the president directly warned the U.S. may take military action to protect Iranian protesters.
If they start killing people like they have in the past, we will get involved. We'll be hitting them very hard where it hurts. And that doesn't mean boots on the ground, but it means hitting them very, very hard where it hurts.
He has some lawmaker support. Top Trump ally, Senator Lindsey Graham, suggesting action could come soon in a post of his own saying help is on the way. Now, Iran's parliament speaker is warning today if the U.S. does intervene, Tehran is poised to retaliate by targeting U.S. military bases and the country of Israel. Despite President Trump's threats, Iran continues to crack down on protesters. More than 100 people are believed to have been killed in the demonstrations, and over 2,600 have been arrested, according to activists. Plus, we note the country has cut off internet and phone access. Iran's supreme leader is also lashing out directly at President Trump in multiple posts, writing in one, the U.S. president, quote, judges arrogantly, saying in another, quote, let him manage his own country. The U.S. did just announce new military action nearby in Syria. U.S. Central Command posted a video over the weekend of a new round of retaliatory strikes on ISIS targets. This is the second round of strikes, remember, in response to last month's ISIS attack on U.S. forces. That ISIS attack killed 2 American soldiers and 1 civilian interpreter. Now, the Pentagon did not say if this latest round of strikes killed anyone or whether they gave the Syrian government a heads up. Chris?
Okay. Hannah, thanks for keeping us up to speed. Appreciate you. All right, joining us now, former National Security Advisor in the first Trump administration and Ambassador to the United Nations for George W. Bush, John Bolton. Ambassador Bolton, what are the likely options the president is being presented with? What does that look like?
Well, I'm sure he's being given a number of possible targets, but before you even get to that point, it'd be nice if we had a strategy in place here. I think removing the Ayatollahs from power is absolutely central to any effort at long-term peace and security in the Middle East. And firing off a couple of cruise missiles because of the repression and murder, really, of these demonstrators isn't a strategy that's going to get you to that point or really resolve anything else. So that's the big question. Is President Trump really now committed to doing something comprehensive with respect to Iran, or at least thinking through what the consequences are, or are we just going to have a one-time, one-off response and then that's it?
So what's to stop the president from doing a Maduro here, right? Just send in the Delta Force, take out the head of the government and do all that. Why is this different or more complicated than that?
Well, I'm not sure it is different or more complicated, although I think every public report about the snatching of Maduro from Caracas emphasized that months of planning were involved, and maybe we've got that done here already. It'd be fine with me if they did it. But as in the case of Venezuela, taking out one person doesn't change the regime. And unfortunately, in Iran today, this is as much a military dictatorship by the Revolutionary Guard with cover by the religious leaders. So the real problem here, I think, is the Revolutionary Guard. And the question is, what are we going to do about that?
So put this in context for us. These feel different than the protests and unrest that we've seen in Iraq in the past couple of decades. And some people are suggesting that now it's a question not of if, but when, that the regime is compromised because of the economic problems. How does this look compared to what we've seen in the recent history?
Well, I think the regime is at its most unpopular point since the 1979 revolution. Certainly, what you're seeing now is a reflection of an abysmal economy driven into the ground by the Ayatollahs over a long period of time, aided by our sanctions, to the point where Iranian agricultural irrigation policy has left the country in a water shortage. They're even talking about having to move the capital out of Tehran. So it's bad, but it's compounded by ethnic discontent, by the young people, 60%, 70% of the population under 30. They know they could have a different life than under the Ayatollahs. And the women, don't forget, over 2 years ago when Mahsa Amini, the Kurdish woman, was murdered by Iranian authorities for not wearing the hijab as they had demanded, that got half the Iranian population essentially in opposition to the regime. So all of these factors put together mean that the regime, while it may look strong from the outside, is very vulnerable. And this is a point when we should be helping the opposition, finding out what they need, perhaps giving them communications equipment. And I think if the president did take military action against the regime, that would help as well in many, many ways.
Okay, the world as we have known it from a geopolitical standpoint for almost 50 years, Iran has been a big part of that story. What are the implications for the region, for the Middle East, for the balance of power there, for Russia, all of that stuff? Iran is a piece of a much bigger puzzle. What happens if we see regime change in Iran?
Well, if you got a regime that was at least somewhat responsive to the Iranian people, I'm not saying Jeffersonian democracy is going to break out tomorrow, because it's not, but the Ayatollahs themselves, both through their nuclear weapons program and their support for terrorism, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Shia militia in Iraq, state terrorism conducted against Iranian exiles and here in America, too. if you could take that out of the picture and have a government in Tehran that just worried about Iran, you'd have much better prospect for peace and stability in the Middle East than we do now. And Russia and China would lose their remaining key ally in the region. So I think this would be a dramatic step toward a more secure, safer world for the U.S., for its Arab partners, and really for the free world as a whole.
Ambassador Bolton, we thank you for your time this Sunday. Thanks for coming to see us. All right. With us now here in studios, Congressman Suhas Subramanyam. He is a Democrat from Northern Virginia. Congressman, you've been supportive of the, I mean, as I think most Americans are, of the effort of an oppressed Iranian people. We have a tweet. There's a, as they would say, there's a tweet for that. For years, the people of Iran have been faced with human rights abuses and economic turmoil, leading to protests, demanding change as the current protests in Iran continue. I stand with the people of Iran and their aspirations for a more free, secular future. What does that mean in terms of U.S. policy? Would you back the president if he lit up the mullahs?
I want to make sure, first off, we're not seen as the reason for regime change again. We've done regime change very poorly in our history as a country. With that said, I do think we should be standing with the Iranian people because they've been oppressed for so many years. Their government has been meddling and really destabilizing the entire region for decades now. And so I think it would be a very good thing if there was regime change in Iran. But I want the Iranian people to feel ownership over that and be able to decide how that ends up going. But certainly we want to support them.
Okay, so you're open. If there's a plan in place or there's something that seems reasonable, you might back the administration?
Well, certainly what we'd want to do is whatever regime comes out of this, that's up to the Iranian people, that we would hopefully have a good relationship with that regime and make sure that Iran's not funding Hezbollah, Hamas, and other terrorist groups around the region. So that would be a good development for us. Your
senator, Tim Kaine, had a success. He got a war powers resolution to a final vote, right, in the Senate. Got, and this is on Venezuela principally, but got enough Republicans to come in to force a vote. The president says that the only restraint on his use of military power in the world is his own morality and his own mind. That's what he told the New York Times. Senator Kaine's not going to get 60 votes for this in the Senate, right? There are not going to be enough Republicans. I think he needs 6 more Republicans or something to come across and back that. President kind of has a point about Congress, right? Congress makes a lot of noise about presidential authority and war powers and all this stuff. But what, reasonably speaking, is the check on the president's authority to do stuff like invade Greenland, let's say?
Well, Congress ought to be the check. The problem is Republicans continue to follow President Trump wherever he goes. Now, we're starting to see some Republicans break off a little bit more, which I think is encouraging. But in the end, if enough Republicans and Democrats come together, one way we can stop this is by, we pass budgets, right? And we can say, the president wants to increase the military budget now by 50%. I wonder why, right? And so what we can do in that instance is try to put a check on that, put language in our budget saying that you cannot spend this on regime change. We can continue to push war power resolutions as well. We were unsuccessful a couple weeks ago, but we're going to try again. And we want to make sure that Congress is a check on the president because that's why the Constitution is set up. And so it's unacceptable right now the way Republicans are still going along with the president on this.
A lot of Americans, I think, in the past week have felt seasick, brokenhearted, watching what has played out in Minneapolis. And they're presented with 2 frequently different points of view. You hear from the administration, you hear from supporters, basically, the woman deserved to die. She got what she deserved because she was messing around and she found out. And then I get to hear from other people that this was an officer who killed, this ICE agent killed her in cold blood, that it was a premeditated murder. There's not a lot of nuance going on out there, and what you believe affects what you see. What do you see when you look at that video? What do you think happened?
Well, Renee Good did not deserve to die. Let's start there. And she's a mother. She's 37 years old. She had a life. And the problem that I'm seeing now is this has instilled fear among everyone in communities like mine in Virginia. We're having a vigil for her today right now. And a lot of people feel a lot of sadness and they feel a lot of empathy for her. And this was not an isolated incident by ICE. The reality is there's been more than a dozen other types of shootings as well. More people have died in ICE custody in the past year than in their history. And so this has been a huge issue right now, and it's instilling fear among the American people, and so that's what we need to address.
I noted a juxtaposition between Tim Walz the governor of Minnesota, and Jacob Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis, in how they're talking about this. And I listened to Tim Walz talk about calm down. We need calm in this space. And then I hear a lot of other Democrats who are like, go, like now is the time. How should your party, how should members of your party, or maybe just how do you, because you don't have to tell them how to live, how do you think about the balance between expressing your outrage and sort of giving the administration what it may want, which is unrest, violence in the streets, an excuse to move troops in and all that stuff?
You know, when I see that video of her getting shot, I think to myself, this doesn't have to be a partisan issue. I'm sure there are Republicans who can agree with us as Democrats that this was wrong and that a real investigation needs to happen, and we don't need a cover-up or to just call her a domestic terrorist. You know, again, we're looking more into the context, but the reality is I've seen enough context now to know that she didn't deserve to die at this point, right? And so the real question now is, can we find enough Republicans to work with us as Democrats to put a check on the military authority of ICE at this point, because we passed a budget that turned them into a military. That's what led to this and other actions. And so I'd like to see more bipartisan action to try to make sure we have some checks on ICE and checks on the way they're approaching communities today.
My buddy Jonah Goldberg likes to say his preferred immigration policy for the United States is to have one. And we have had a chaotic and disordered immigration policy in the United States for decades, where Republicans winked at illegal immigration when it helped businesses, and Democrats winked at illegal immigration when it was among core constituencies for their party, and it got us to where we are now. For Democrats, the fact that voters still prefer Republicans to Democrats on immigration, despite all of the things that you point out, how do Democrats get control of the narrative? Not that a majority of Americans don't agree with them about tactics being used to immigration law, but they still are picking Republicans on the question of immigration. How do Democrats address that?
I mean, we need to pass comprehensive immigration reform. We need a predictable immigration system so that every person who comes in and out of this country knows exactly what the rules are, because right now they are not applied evenly. There's no standard. It's arbitrary. People have wait times and they don't know how to get in. My office deals with more immigration issues than any other issue that we have because it's so unpredictable. And so what we need is predictable immigration policy that everyone can understand and get around.
Okay. All right. I appreciate you being here. We thank you. Okay, America, if you were getting ready already for Valentine's Day in Casanova, Virginia, you would know him already. But if you don't, here he is, Congressman Suhas Subramanyam. We thank you. Coming up, 2026 is looking different already as Republicans in Congress are pushing back on the president's agenda as anxieties about affordability rankle swing districts. We have one of the Republicans who's leading the charge, Pennsylvania Congressman Rob Bresnahan, joins us next. The Hill Sunday. We'll be right back. On Thursday, the House passed a bill that would extend the just expired Obamacare subsidies for 3 years. That ups the pressure on Senate Republicans to reach an election year compromise as millions of Americans are confronting premium hikes, some nearly $1,000 a month. Our next guest says he is not a fan of Obamacare, but is still trying to patch the hole in the program that's causing the premium hikes. He was one of the 4 leaders of that House revolt, and it paid off as 13 more GOPers joined in. Congressman Rob Bresnahan joins us now from his northeastern Pennsylvania district. Congressman, what are the prospects in the Senate? You pulled it off, you got it out of the House. Now what happens in the Senate?
Well, Chris, first and foremost, thanks for having me on. Just last week, we had a great conversation with some of our Senate counterparts who have expressed a lot of the same interest on trying to come up with a program that ultimately can get to the president's desk and be signed into law. We heard at the Republican Issues Conference the conversations relevant to being flexible. And something that I was a huge advocate for since even during the government shutdown was coming up with some kind of extension with reforms, with some kind of de minimis monthly premium payment to get rid of the waste and the fraud and the duplicate phantom enrollees inside of the program, whether it's a $1 a month premium, a $5 a month premium. And that was something that we really worked in a bipartisan fashion on in the House. And hearing those conversations and being a part of those conversations in the Senate certainly leads me to believe that, we are close to getting something back into the conversations. But that's what we did. When 17 other Republicans voted to keep these conversations going, that's exactly what it was. I did not feel it would be prudent to rip the rug out from underneath 30,000 people in northeastern Pennsylvania that rely on the ACA enhanced premium tax credits for coverage.
Okay, what about the people whose premiums have already gone up?
Well, it's certainly something that we could talk about, extending the open enrollment program, or and extending that into a longer period of time. It was something that obviously before the expiration, that's why we entered into the discharge petition, hoping that we can come together. Unfortunately, during the Rules Committee markup, the reform initiatives did not make it to the House floor. So I know that we're going to continue to do everything that we can within our power and come up with some kind of meaningful reform to the system. I don't agree with extending these things for 3 years. I thought that there was a 2-year extension with the 700% federal poverty limit line, with the de minimis monthly premium, doing the PBM reform, something that so many of my colleagues, both Republican and Democrat, agree with, getting rid of the spread pricing, making sure there's transparency, helping out our independent pharmacies. So there was a lot of really good reform measures, and I think there's still absolutely an appetite.
Okay, so here's what the Obamacare critics are going to say. They're going to say they won't back an extension because it just delays the inevitable. And they don't want to spend money that we don't have to prop up a program that they say doesn't work. What do you say to the Republicans? I hear some of that in your answer. What do you say to those Republicans who are like, it's going to go down eventually, let it go down now?
I think that, you have to be reasonable. You have to be pragmatic. And the people that, are relying on the Obamacare enhanced premium tax credits are the independent contractors. It is our small businesses. It is people in between health coverage. I have family members. I have friends that rely on the enhanced premium tax credits. And in northeastern Pennsylvania, according to some of the estimates, people are seeing increases at over 200%. So you have to be reasonable and you have to be pragmatic. And I think there's a way that you can thread this needle. I wasn't in Congress when the original Obamacare conversation took place. I've been here now for a year and 7 days. But we have to be reasonable, and you can't just rip the rug out from underneath people. So there's a pragmatic way to approach it, and that's getting rid of by putting realistic reforms into the conversation. A clean 3-year extension was really something hard for me to wrap my head around, but we needed to keep these conversations in the ball field and actually do a bicameral, bipartisan solution and be able to ultimately get it signed into law. We can't just sit idly and watch premiums increase by 200 and some odd percent.
Okay, so that's a good answer for the Republican critics. Okay, so what Democrats are going to say is that your party has had 16 years to come up with an alternative to Obamacare, but all Republicans have done is impede implementation and undercut core components. So what do you say to them?
I wasn't in Congress 16 years ago. I wasn't in Congress 10 years ago. I've been in Congress for the last year, and I think that's really where I'm willing to put my neck out forward and come to the table. And, even during the government shutdown and immediately right thereafter, I was adamant that we should not have shut down the government. And there was a place and a time to have these conversations about the enhanced premium tax credits. And it wasn't while the government was shut down. And I feel that I upheld my end of the bargain by the second that we got back to Washington, we had bipartisan conversations. And now you need to have bicameral and bipartisan conversations in both the House and the Senate, because you need to be able to pass a piece of legislation that makes it through both entities and both sides of the chamber. So I think that you could talk about what happened 10 years ago. You could talk about what happened 15 years ago. The reality is it was Democrats that had control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency when these were set to expire with a 5-year lifespan. The reality is we've reached that point, and we have not put a solution in place. These are conversations that we need to have. Listen, I want to lower healthcare costs for everyone, and I think there's many different ways that we can go about approaching it. But still, the reality is these enhanced premium tax credits have expired. We are up against the wall. And we need to be able to come up with some kind of reform mechanism. And, there was 3 different solutions. There was a 1-year clean extension. There was a 2-year extension with 1-year clean extension, year 2 starting the reforms. And the third option, which I think is something that the Senate Senator Marino is leading a charge on the Senate side for Republicans, mimic something that I really would have liked to have seen become a reality.
Okay, I got to ask you about the ICE stuff before I let you go. Immigration was the strongest selling point for Republicans in 2024. It was the Democrats' weakest point, and it was the strongest point for Republicans. But the ugly scenes like we watched in Minnesota on Wednesday are turning voters against your party on this stuff. Has ICE gone too far? Has the administration gone too far here?
I think first and foremost, you have to realize and understand and approach this from the empathetic perspective that there was a woman that was killed, and that ICE agent's life will never be the same moving forward. I've seen some of the videos. I would really like a full readout as to where everything unraveled. I come from a world where if a police officer tells me to stop, I stop. I don't slam on the gas. I don't know why that woman was in that location, but what's really interesting is two different people can watch that same video clip, and the dichotomy of positions are vastly different. But I think you have to take the human approach here, and perhaps there was panic. Perhaps that person should have removed themselves from the situation and not put themselves in a situation where there was a confrontation with federal ICE agents. But I'll tell you, I ran on having a secure border, an economy that works, and communities that are safe. And I really would like to see that you turn down the temperature. Actually, Governor Walz had said something that I agree with, let alone the fraud that's taking place there. That's a different conversation. But let's turn down the rhetoric, let's turn down the temperature, and let's be the adult in the room here and come up with some kind of meaningful solution.
Adults in Washington, what will they think of next? Okay, America, if you lived in Wallenpaupack, if you lived on Lake Wallenpaupack, you would know him already. But if you don't, there he is, Congressman Rob Bresnahan. We thank you. All right, America, there's still much more ahead. We're going whole hog on the politics of ICE and immigration. Our best in the business panel, including the great George Will, is waiting on the other side when the Hill Sunday returns. Time to play Choose Your News. Behind door number one, immigration and border security are the strongest part of the Trump agenda and the best thing going for Republicans. Look at this. Border security is the only issue last month where the president was above water. Or what about this? Even though, as you'll see, the administration's underwater on the broader issue of immigration, they've been whooping the Democrats. So if you're a Republican feeling a little seasick watching the backlash after the Minnesota shooting, you can tell yourself that the issue is still a winner for your party this midterm year. But you should also think about this. Just because voters still don't trust Democrats on immigration doesn't mean that the issue can't hurt the GOP. These numbers are from October, well before the most recent round of intensification. If a majority thought it was too much then, what do you think they're thinking now? And the call is coming from inside the House. Look at this. 20% of Republicans is not very many Republicans. Okay, but a 7-point increase in 7 months in the share of Republicans concerned is noteworthy. I would love to see those numbers today because I bet the rate of increase has climbed dramatically. The pickle for Republicans trying to hold on to the House and Senate is that their party's best issue is carrying an increasing amount of baggage. But vulnerable GOPers probably shouldn't be looking to the White House for any relief here.
ICE agents are faithfully enforcing federal law to protect the safety of the American people by removing criminal illegal aliens from our country, which is exactly what nearly 80 million Americans elected President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance to do.
All right, with us now, it's our best in the business panel of journalists, George Will, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for The Washington Post and senior political contributor for NewsNation, Paul Kane, chief congressional correspondent for The Washington Post, and Burgess Everett, congressional bureau chief for Semaphore. Mr. Will, I noted that in the initial response to the shooting in Minneapolis, Kristi Noem and others in the administration took the hardest possible line. And then, as the day went on, I heard the president backtrack. It's sad. He said, I heard Tom Homan, who's the border czar, say, well, we should let the process work out. How should or will the administration think about projecting force and strength and power versus humanity?
Let's start with the facts about ICE. ICE decides to double itself, to which end they bring in $50,000 signing bonuses to lure young men out of their parents' basements where they're playing video games. And then they lower the recruitment standards, and then they curtail the training of these people. Then they dress them in battle fatigues as though they're going to climb the mountains of Iwo Jima. and then they put masks on them. Finally, they give them a gun. What could possibly go wrong? This is what can go wrong. The question is, will the American people put up with the law enforcement measures necessary or thought necessary to have deportations on industrial scale? And I think they won't.
I think they won't. Paul, in Minnesota, a week ago, 8 days ago, if we were talking about what's going on in Minnesota, we would have said Somali crisis, welfare fraud, Tim Walz is in big trouble for his reelection. The world has changed it has gone 180 degrees around. Walz dropped out. Amy Klobuchar says she may get in and run for governor, and she is the big dog in Minnesota politics. And an issue that was working for Republicans is now working for Democrats. What do you see?
Look, this is a state that Joe Biden won by 7 points. Barack Obama won by 7 points. In a bad year, Kamala Harris won it by 4.2%. This was going to be a stretch for Republicans to try and win a governor's race there or the Senate race there. This current environment is bad for Republicans. And Amy Klobuchar has this Minnesota nice image.
In that year that Harris won by 4.2, Amy Klobuchar won by 16.
I forgot to write that down. Yeah, and so she kind of comes in, if she does decide to run, she comes in as the person who has that calming sense that I think a lot of Minnesotans will be looking for. I mean, from George Floyd to the last couple of weeks, they have just been in a storm. The shooting early last year, they're looking, I think, for calm right now.
Minnesota's lived too much history in the past 5 years, is for sure. Burgess, the revolt over Obamacare in the House. Yeah, I was surprised. You probably weren't, because you paid.
17 was a high number.
17. I was surprised. They started with 4. They ended up with 17. What's your reaction? You heard Congressman Bresnahan talk about what he was hoping was going to happen here. Yeah. Give us the skinny. What's the inside?
And I think you could see 17 even increase if Bernie Moreno, the senator from Ohio, freshman, he's just a year in. He's trying to sell this deal, this 2-year deal that would have income caps. It would make people pay for plans. There'd be no $0 plans. And it would extend, as we were just talking about, that open enrollment period. So if he can convince President Trump and the White House to get on board, you could see that number go up in the House, and in the Senate, you could see a bunch of Republicans endorse it. But absent a presidential endorsement, it looks really hard to me.
Okay. Does that sound right? You would.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell always used to say about a president, we need the person who will sign something into law.
That's pretty good.
Unless, if you don't have the president on board to sign the thing, then it doesn't go anywhere.
The Republican revolt, Burgess, has been, broadly speaking, am I overstating it when I say that this feels different, that on this, war powers, on a list of issues now we're starting to see some of this?
Yeah, I mean, Paul and I were both kind of writing in the same universe the past few days, which was, you've seen 5 Republicans defect on the Venezuela war powers. Yeah. You saw the Affordable Care Act vote. And then there were these veto overrides of the president, which were not successful, but dozens of House Republicans supported the override of the president's veto. So I wouldn't overstate it and say, like, Republicans are all running against Trump and there's some huge rebellion. Right. But this very tight grip that he had a year ago is not there then.
There's a whiff out there. All right, Mr. Weld, the president has an answer. He has many answers, but one of his answers is that we need to make usury laws great again. And over the weekend, he dropped a proposal that credit card companies no longer be able to charge the 22, 23% interest rates that are common for personal credit and cap it at 10%. And his supporters in Congress, like Josh Hawley, Senator Marshall from Kansas and others, said, good, it's time that we do it. This is an Elizabeth Warren kind of thing. The horseshoe is horseshoeing. Americans hate how much they pay in credit card fees. Why wouldn't this be an electoral winner for Republicans?
It might be. As the president goes down his list, checking off all the things he now agrees with the progressives, he's come to price controls. What he's talking about is controlling the price of credit. Now, what you're going to get from this is a scarcity of credit. That's what you get. You get rent controls, you get a scarcity of affordable housing in New York City. So this is not new. It's not a departure on his part. But as you've heard me say before, he is, in my judgment, the most progressive president we've ever had. Just go down the list.
Woodrow Wilson, hold my beer.
Government is the largest shareholder in Intel now.
Yeah.
Government has a golden share in U.S. Steel, so when U.S. Steel wants to close a plant in Gary, they say, no, don't think so.
All right, there you go. All right, well, of a piece with this, coming up is MAGA going neocon, what? When The Hill Sunday returns.
Every weeknight on NewsNation, Blake Berman brings you the biggest stories from the top newsmakers in Washington.
We went in there, we took out a bad guy.
There are a lot of people at home looking for change.
How long is the U.S. going to be running Venezuela?
President Trump is going to keep his options open.
The Hill with Blake Berman, weeknights at 6, 5 Central. News for all Americans.
Well, lucky for you, our Best in the Business panel is back with us. Okay, Burgess, we start with you. The hawks are loving Donald Trump, right? I am very sure that at the end of the first Trump term, folks like Tom Cotton and others who are big proponents, people who are aligned with Ambassador Bolton on these questions, they are feeling really, really good right now. Talk about the coalitional problems for Republicans. How sincere was the anti-interventionism of MAGA 1.0?
Well, I'm kind of struck by what Rand Paul said about this, which is that there should be a law against Lindsey Graham visiting the White House more than once every 2 weeks.
It's mean.
But what we've seen is that Lindsey Graham has played the long game with Trump, and he's getting rewarded for it because Trump is being very aggressive with Venezuela. It could go on to Cuba. We're seeing now murmurs of possibly going into Iran. And we're wondering, does anybody else besides Rand Paul really care about this? We found out there are a handful of other Republicans in the Senate that do care about it. And if you can find another thing that unites Rand Paul, Josh Hawley, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Todd Young, I'd like to hear it, because that is the motleyest crew of Republicans that I've ever heard of.
Do you know George Will is a very good writer? Are you aware of that?
I bring my dictionary to his columns.
You may have heard that. I'm going to read Mr. Will, you to you. When Theodore Roosevelt asked Attorney General Philander Knox to concoct a legal justification for the unsavory U.S. measures that enabled construction of the Panama Canal, Knox replied, "Oh, Mr. President, do not let so great an achievement suffer from any taint of legality." We've had a fungible, funky relationship between presidential authority, war powers, and all of that stuff. It's basically when it's popular, people go for it. When it's unpopular, they say that it was unconstitutional. Talk about the moment here. You know, the president, I don't think we have to take seriously. This is only my morality is the only thing that constrains me. But talk about the conception of presidential military authority.
Courts defer to it. The public defers to it. The military, everyone defers to it. No president has acknowledged the constitutionality of the War Powers Act or really complied with it, other than a sort of formal mocking way, actually. The administration has learned something. People say, well, you shouldn't engage in regime change. Well, they've got a new way of regime change where you go in and you don't change the regime at all, other than the person who was at the top. What they've learned, Chris, is what happened in Iraq. When we decided to dissolve the Iraqi army, and suddenly you had 300,000 young, unemployed men armed and trained for violence. What could come out of that except what came out of it, which is strife?
So this is like Donald Trump he said that the reason George W. Bush should have been impeached was for failing to take the oil in Iraq. So some of this feels kind of like a do-over for people who were critics of the Iraq War.
What persists in Venezuela are security forces and the military, both of which have done very well from the petrodollars.
Paul, the president called, it is said, to cuss out Susan Collins for, as Burgess says, voting alongside these Republicans who want a check on his authority. Susan Collins told the press, well, I guess he wants me to lose, is basically what she said, because she needs room on this. She needs room to get away from Trump. How real is this pushback that Burgess talks about? How does this manifest itself in an election year?
we live in the idea that people are going to rally around the flag anymore in politics has sort of really fallen apart. Trump's best months on foreign policy ever as president were late June, bombing Iran successfully, and early October, getting to a ceasefire with Israel and Hamas.
That was his big moment.
And there is no data point at all where his approval went up in either month, according to Gallup. And so the idea that he is going to browbeat senators in really tough elections into caving on these votes, it's just not going to happen. And so, you know, she's going to have her independence because she needs it. And Republicans know that she is the only possible senator who can
And
win.
John Thune is going to run a lot of interference for her.
He's going to try. I don't know how public that interference will be, but he will privately plead, don't talk her down. Don't, tweet at her. Sorry, truth at her.
Don't truth it. Keep your truth to yourself. You know who else is a good writer? Paul Kane is also a good writer.
I was reading him just this morning.
Well, as well you should have, because you should have read his, the headline is Steny Hoyer to retire, ending storied career in elected office. Paul and I were talking about this earlier. More than 1 in 10 members of Congress are going to not seek re-election. Whoever wins, we are going to experience a sea change in who's in Congress. What's the vibe?
I mean, it's not seen as a great job, and I think even the Senate is no longer seen as a great job. And the data point here is that we have senators who are running to be governors of their state. Now, I'm old enough to remember when the opposite was true. Governors wanted to be senators. That is no longer the case. And if Amy Klobuchar ends up running for Minnesota governor, I'm guessing that's the most senators you've had running for governor ever. It should be 4.
Mr. Will, Steny Hoyer was elected in 1980. Which in political terms is essentially since before the earth cooled. Generational change is coming to Congress no matter what.
Absolutely, and I think people are leaving out of embarrassment. I mean, how'd you like it on your tombstone? I was in the Senate when Trump was president because it's an embarrassing job to have right now. They're not basically involved in governance anymore.
What was that like?
So Hoyer he still loves the institution, and he understands that generational change is coming. What he laments is that what you're talking about, with so many people having left, who are leaving and have left in previous years, you're losing people who know how to do things. He worked on the Americans with Disabilities Act in the late 80s and early 90s and built coalitions across the aisle through 5 different House committees, a bunch of Senate committees, and eventually they got an individual bill signed into law. People don't know how to do that anymore.
Mr. Will, I think it was Casey Stengel who said, doesn't anybody here know how to play this game?
Of the 62 maps, There's a perverse dialectic going on here. The people who are leaving are exactly the ones you'd want to stay because they're embarrassed by the institutions. Those who are staying are people for whom it doesn't matter that they don't matter.
Well, there's a cheerful note for your Sunday panel. We thank you all very much for being with us today. We always appreciate you. Coming up, no buts about it, your almanac is next. This is your almanac for today, Sunday, January 11th, 2026. On this day in 1964, U.S. Surgeon General Luther Terry released a bombshell report announcing a link between cancer and smoking, sending shockwaves through the country. The government even waited for a Saturday to release the report to mitigate the effects on the stock market. But despite the shock, it wasn't exactly news to Americans that smoking was bad for your health. In the 1950s, nearly half of all adults were regular smokers, and tobacco companies made a selling point out of mitigating bad health effects, even featuring doctors in their ads espousing their products as less harmful. Even so, smoking was a national pastime, from rations given to soldiers, to cigarette vending machines in diners, to airlines offering passengers complimentary packs of butts. And it went all the way to the top. President Kennedy made cigarettes part of the package that dignitaries and reporters received when they flew on Air Force One. The stately smokes were presidential perks for more than 2 decades until 1988, when Nancy Reagan just said no, opting for red, white, and blue M&Ms in place of coffin nails. And that's the way it's been ever since. The Surgeon General's report eventually brought warnings printed on cigarette packages, but that did not shield the industry from the lawsuits that eventually laid low one of the pillars of American big business. The biggest change, smoking just wasn't cool for a health-conscious America at the end of the 20th century. The most recent numbers say only 1 in 10 adults smoke. So whatever you're puffing on this week, we hope it's not a drag. Until next time.